Hello, Tony here again from Homa Pumps, and today we're going to continue with our GRP 12 teardown. I've pulled our exploded view out so we can follow along with that if need be, and we'll get set up here quickly and we'll start doing our teardown. Alright, so now we're all set up to start our teardown of the GRP 12. And we know it's GRP 12 by looking at our data plate under model. It will tell us the exact model that we have. We just confirm that. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to drain the oil out of this because we're going to be removing our lower seal. And if we kept the oil in, we just have a big mess. So on the GRP 12, we have one plug, and it's the oil drain plug. And we're going to remove that. And that takes a 6mm Allen wrench. And I use a rag and I remove it slowly to remove any air pressure that's in there that's built up over a period of time when it's running. And I want to release it, and a lot of times you can hear the air escaping. I use this rag here, so if I go too far and it decides to shoot out, I don't take an oil bath. I can kind of deflect it. I've already drained the oil in this earlier, so we don't make a big mess in here when we do this. But I just want to demonstrate that there could be pressure there and you want to protect yourself from that spray coming out. So we're going to remove the plug. Like so. Behind the plug is a plastic washer. We recommend anytime you remove the plug is to replace that washer. We'll put that plug to one side. We would take and turn this on to its side into a drain bucket, drain all the oil out. Once the oil is drained out, we can proceed with our teardown. The easiest way to tear this GRP 12 down is to start at the bottom. So we're going to lay it over. Get this in here closer. If you remember from yesterday, we had a suction cover, we had our impeller cutters. So I want to remove that suction cover at this time so I can get to the impeller and remove the impeller. So we'll go ahead and remove our cap screws. And again, if we remember, those were 5mm cap screws. So we'll remove them and we'll take them totally out. And we'll put them to one side. We're going to go into our set screws, the 3 of them, so we can start pulling that suction cover off. And again, it was 4mm. And we can see, again, the housing starting to come off. There's 3, so I want to do them evenly to bring it out. Now that I have it moving, I'm going to take the pry bars. And we remove our housing. We'll set that off to one side also. And now we have our impeller. We want to remove that. That's also a 5mm that we have to put there. Remember, this is a cutter, so it's sharp. So I don't want to kind of hold my hand there and try to release that impeller. So I'm going to take a pair of channel locks, turn it, and I'm going to hold it. Take the 5mm I have on a socket ring, and I'm going to turn it while I'm holding the impeller until I can release it. Once I have it released, I'm going to put those over to one side and I can go back to my T-handle. Your impeller bolt. If we look at the cutter, there's a little dowel pin there or an aligning pin that goes on to your impeller. That holds that in place, and it's worked as a driving tool, so it keeps it in place. So we'll put that over there. Now I want to remove my impeller. Now there's two ways that seals are held into place for your lower seals. It's either by an impeller, which makes your final adjustment to that lower seal, or they'll put a set screw, snap ring on the shaft, and that's set into place to where it seats that lower seal. On the GRP 12, we set that lower seal with our impeller. So again, if I kept the oil in here and just removed the impeller, chances are that lower seal would pop off and it would just spill oil all over the place because the impeller is actually holding that seal up. So it's a keyed impeller, and we know that because you can see the keyway here. And we're just going to put a couple of pry bars in here, and we're going to pry the impeller off. Once I get it moving, I see if I can get it with my fingers back behind it. And our impeller is off. Set that over, and if we look up in here now, we can see a key. We can see our rotating lower seal and the bellows on the shaft. I have to remove the key to be able to get that seal off because the seal bellows won't pass over that. So to do that, I could use a pair of side cuts, needle nose, whatever, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to lift up on it and pull it out. And we want to put this over here. I usually set it up on the impeller so I don't lose it. And next I want to remove this lower rotating seal face and spring. To do that, I'm going to take a flat tip screwdriver and I'm going to grab just on the other side of the spring here, and I'm going to work it in motions to where I'm almost just kind of prying it off until it moves. And I bring it out, and I bring it out slowly because here's my rotating seal face. It's silicon carbide seal face, and that's standard in all Homa pumps. And I want to be very careful because silicon carbide's very hard surface. So if I hit it with the end of a screwdriver, anything metal, hit it on an edge, chances are I'm going to chip or crack that. So I got to be very careful with this. So I'm going to set that off to one side. Now we have everything off the lower end to make this shaft able to be slide up through the housing, the oil housing. So at this point, I'm going to tip this back over, and we're going to go and start removing the top end and to get to the rotor. I'm going to use these 2x4s to kind of set it on. And if we look, we have 7 screws. We have 3 screws that hold the motor to the oil housing. We have 4 screws that hold the motor and the oil housing to the volute. All of those screws have to be removed to be able to get the motor off the rotor. They're 5mm. We'll unscrew these. This one here actually goes through the motor through the oil housing into the volute, and you can see the depth of that. The next screw next to it is a shorter screw, which is just going in from the motor into the oil housing itself. So again, you can kind of see how the two are in there and the difference in lengths. There's 4 of the long ones, there's 3 of the short ones. We have to remove all of those at this point. right? And we have 4 long screws, and we have 3 of the shorter. We'll put those over here. And now we're going to lift the oil housing and stator motor housing off of the volute. And I'm just going to lay it here so I can move stuff out. At this point, we see the stationary seal face for your lower seal. It's too hard to remove when the shaft's in. You'll never be able to get a tool up in there and get that without damaging that seal face. But once it's off at this point, I can set it a rag, because remember, we got silicon carbide here. I want to use my thumb and I want to push it down. And it'll probably drop. That's why I put the rag there for a cushion for it. And we can see now where it sets up in there. That's your lower stationary seal face. If you can see this, one side has I'll call it a groove in it, and one side is a polished surface. This polished surface is the surface that's doing the sealing. This always goes into my rubber seal that goes up into the housing, so it's going to go up into this direction. I'm going to set that over to there. We'll put this housing over here to one side, and we'll get ready to remove the bearing housing from the motor. Now, nothing's holding it in place except I have an O-ring. Okay, and I'm going to pull this out. You could use pry bars. There's an O-ring here. Now, there's one thing I want to show you at this point is if you had a GRP 24 through 50, we would incorporate a seal leak in our oil chamber, and it would set in this location, and there'd be a wire coming up through my oil housing up into my motor, and this would be sticking up, and there'd be a wire, another connector from here that would plug into here. So if I had that GRP 24 through 50, I can't just yank this off without disconnecting that plug. So just a note, if you get up into the larger GRPs, you'll have that leak. This doesn't have it. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to pull it out slowly, watching that I don't hit our stator that's in here with any of the metal. I don't want to chip any of that varnish that's in there and the insulation that's on that stator, because I can create a short. So I want to bring it out slowly, and I'm going to set it over there. So now you can see your stator. You can see where our wires are for our connections to our cable, and you can see the upper bearing seat. The upper bearing is pressed onto the shaft, and we do a slip fit up into the housing. So now you've just tore down the GRP 12 to the bearing housing. Welcome back. We're back in the shop here, and we're going to start rebuilding the GRP 12. At this point, we have it apart, and we're going to get ready to reassemble. First thing we want to do is make sure that all our stator leads and connections are tucked up around the outside of our stator. So when we reinstall it onto the rotor, we're not going to pinch any wires on that shoulder there. So we kind of tuck everything in. Make sure there's no debris and everything's clean. Right now, the way we're going to start is by putting the stator housing onto the rotor, and then we'll worry about putting the complete unit onto the oil housing and the volute. So remember, we're working with 3 larger screws and 3 shorter screws right now. All I'm going to worry about are the 3 shorter ones, because all I want to do is bolt it to the bearing housing. We also know when I'm going to get ready to put this together is a small screw's going to go here and a small screw's going to go there, and you can see how close they are. If I look at my stator housing, I have those holes right here, so I know I have to lift this up and set it here. How it sets on the housing right now doesn't matter because we're going to change that. So we'll lift this up. We'll be very careful setting it down not to hit that winding. We'll get it started here, and I'm going to take a tool just to line up the screw holes so I don't have to guess where they are. We have 3 of those. Now, once I have those tight, I'm going to put in my screws, longer ones, that are going to go down through the motor, through the bearing housing, and into the volute. And there's 4 long ones. I'm just going to bring them down. And I'm going to go back and make sure that the other ones are tight. They are. So the top end is completely assembled at this point. So now I'm going to turn it over again, and we're going to start building from the bottom up. All right, so now the first step we have to do is put our stationary lower seal in. Again, this is our lower stationary. If you remember, I said there's a little groove in the back side of that seal face, polished surface on the sealing face itself, and then it sits into a little rubber boot. That's going to go up and in. To put that up and in, we have a special tool that's the same diameter as our seal face to help us install it by pushing it up, so we're not having to tap it, because remember, it's silicon carbide and it's very delicate when we hit it because it's so brittle. So I'm just going to start this with my fingers to get it up in there. Then I'm going to take the tool. I'm not going to tap it, I'm just going to push it on. You can tell I have the seal up in place now. You never want to hit this with a hammer, because if you do, chances are you're going to break that seal face. So our next step is to put the rotating portion of the seal. Again, the seal face, I always put a couple of drops of oil on there so we don't get a dry start. We have a bellows. I put a little bit of soap there because that's got to slide up over that shaft. I'm going to start this in a second because I also have a special tool for here for seating and putting it up on. Now, remember, this is the final adjustment to this seal is done by our impeller. So this, I'm just going to get it up there to get it into place. I always start everything by hand first to get it started. Okay, and then I'm going to take the tool and push it on. All right. So now the seal's up and on. It hasn't been, the final adjustment hasn't been made on it yet, but it's in place. The next thing we have to do is take our key and install it into the shaft. I always make sure the key slides nicely inside the impeller to make sure I'm not going to get any friction or any interference with it there. I'm just going to set that in, make sure it sets in there nicely. And then I'm going to install the impeller. I don't have to put any never sees. I don't want to put Loctite. I'm just going to put it on. We can start it at the edge. I turn it a little bit until I feel it click onto the key, so I know I'm in the right location to be able to push this in. Then I'm going to just push it up. Now I'm not seating it because I don't have enough strength to get it, push that seal up by myself. And with my hands, we'll just work it on now with the impeller bolt. So we have our dowel pin for the aligning here and to drive the cutter. We have our impeller bolt. We're going to use Loctite 242. We're just going to put a drop at the end here of the 242 to lock the impeller bolt in. You don't want to put it over the whole bolt. Too much of a good thing's too much. We only need a little drop. You don't need a lot of it. So we're going to line up the dowel pin with the hole for it here. I'm going to start the impeller bolt just to get it started. I'm not going to tighten it down with my hand here because, again, those edges are sharp. I'll take my channel locks again to hold it. And we'll see if we can see the impeller moving as I tighten this up. But you should be able to see it move in and make that final setting of that seal. Now that's it. We can make sure it spins, which it does. So we're sure we didn't go too far and it stopped where it was supposed to be and that the seal and everything is set correctly. Next, we're going to install the lower suction cover. We'll make sure that our set screws are backed out flush. We'll get this up and we'll just start it. Lining pin, we'll tap it. And we'll put our screws in. Now we're going to adjust this like we did yesterday. I'm going to make sure it's up tight. I'm just going to tighten these a little bit. We'll see if it's pinned. And it doesn't because we're locked up. Remember that from yesterday. So now I have to make my adjustment. I'm going to back off on the cap screws a little bit. I'll bring the set screws until they're just touching. Then I'm going to go that quarter turn on each one of them. Back to the caps to just make them touch. Then I'm going to see if I can turn the impeller. I'm listening for any scraping, rubbing, and I'm not hearing any of that. So we are good to tighten these up. Cap screws. And again, we're going to go back at those set screws just to make sure they are tight. And one more time on the impeller. Make sure nothing changed, which it hasn't. And now we're assembled to this point. The only thing we have left to do now is to add oil. We're just going to add the oil to this location. We're going to replace the plastic washer with a new one. And we're going to install our oil plug. tighten it down. I always spin the impeller one more time before I tip it up, just because I do. And I'm going to tip this up. I'm going to make sure I have no leaks or anything coming from it now. And we have just completed the GRP 12 reassembly.